just about as new to you as anyone else watching this. Just a bit of background about yourself. You can keep it brief, but just a bit of background of where you work,
Sure.
your, and then overall heading of some of the questions you had in mind.
Sure. Yeah. So I currently serve as an associate pastor at a kind of small, medium-sized church in Ontario, Canada. So been a Canadian all my life. Don't hold that against me. But yeah, so born and raised in Southern Ontario and kind of raised in a church-going home. I came to faith in Christ. So raised in an Anglican home. So came to faith in Christ through the witness of friends and sort of around the age of 15, 16, and sort of long story and journey, but began to develop convictions about being involved in vocational ministry, though, because I didn't come from that evangelical world. I didn't even know what that meant. But eventually landed in a place where I ended up serving as a youth pastor in northern British Columbia, so just about 6 hours south of Alaska, and was there for about 3 years and moved back to Ontario and just kind of got plugged back into a church here, helped with a church plant in the Niagara region. And
Is that
then
Anglican related or just more
no, so this was
non-denom?
yeah, non-denominational. When I moved away from home, I moved like 19 hours away from home and attended a variety of churches, kind of some non-denominational stuff mostly, and a little bit kind of um, Baptist churches, but landed for most of my adult life in a fairly well-known non-denominational fellowship and was there for about 15 years and involved in church planting there as well and eldering there as well. They would broadly refer to themselves as they say kind of reformed leaning. So
Okay.
sort of from that sort of young restless reformed Calvangelical kind of background, which to me was sort of and I praise the Lord for that because it was kind of the gateway drug into exploring more about confessionalism and the historic faith. And so with some degree of like my Anglican roots, I had an affinity towards the rich history of our faith that I feel like I'd lost for a long period of time, just being involved in that kind of big box church environment. But yeah, over the last couple years have would always have referred to myself as like reformed in my understanding of salvation, my soteriology, but have increasingly in the last 2 years have just been increasingly um, found an affinity for confessionalism and the historic creeds and confessions of our faith, and found a just richness there that I didn't even realize I was missing. And so I'm always fascinated by how other people made that journey because most of my experience has been fairly common to my own. A lot of guys kind of start in that broad evangelical world and find their way eventually into confessionalism and just loving to hear about. And I guess it's sort of my questions for you is like, what was that journey like for you? And then I'll have some of your kind of two main topics of questions. What was your journey like into Reformed theology? And then how has that Reformed theology, particularly your ecclesiology, how has that affected just your ministry, your family life, your outlook on the gospel in general? So those are the two big buckets, and maybe we can just chat.
Absolutely, that's good. Yeah, I grew up in, and I mentioned this in some other videos. I grew up more in the SBC or Southern Baptist convention background. So Southern Texas SBC church. Grew up in that. That was my experience. Kind of distanced myself in the ministry or from that background in the college age years with questionings, and then returned more through apologetics and specifically guys who I came across first because I was going through a time of questioning. I was listening to guys like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, like some of these great. Well, they used to be more well known. I guess Dawkins is still more well known, but atheistic leaders of that realm. And then to kind of counterbalance that, I started listening to, came across guys like John C. Lennox, who is a mathematician at in England. I forgot the university, Oxford. And so he's a great Christian apologist. And then they came through some other apologists, and that led me to guys like R.C. Sproul, because I think I just came across a video of his. And around this time, I was back into serving in the church, long conviction. I was serving in the oil field, spending a lot of time there, kind of chasing career. Came back into working on a family farm, and that kind of interconnected. There's all these things interconnecting. So faith and having more of assurance in my faith, knocking down these questions of more of a secular mindset that just they didn't hold water. So faith, my understanding of my leadership in my home, spending too much time in work, not with family, and then a desire for farming again. All those interconnected. I left the oil field. Actually, I was really fired right when the company was collapsing. I was the first one to let go, and it was a great blessing in disguise. But went back to family farm. While I was working on the farm, I was going back to my hometown church, and my pastor, great expositional preacher. We wouldn't have all the same convictions, but great expositional guy. And for those who don't know what I'm saying there, that is simply someone who preaches book by book, preaches the point of the passage. Let me say it that way. And overall, he
Mhm.
did a good job at that. So that happened. I was just a surge. I had no interest in the ministry, but I had this surge of interest in serving the church, whether that's putting up chairs or going door to door. And all this time, and as I'm reading through the Bible, first time I ever read through the Bible in a year, kind of plan, or read through the Bible altogether, come across like so many guys like Romans 9, or Ephesians 1, 2, coming up with John 6, some of these key ones. And I was like, what? I've never really come across the distinctions, the grand sovereignty of God. And so that led me into R.C. Sproul, John Piper. And that was my gateway drug, if you will, to more of the Reformed world. I didn't stay there long. I never took to those guys as much as maybe others did. MacArthur, Sproul, uh, John Piper. And then I went in, and I quickly found guys like Richard Barcelos, the Renahans, James Renahan, his son Sam Renahan. I really found those guys quickly. That led me to the 1689 Confession, or Second London Baptist Confession, and then the world opened up, and I got back more into the Puritans and early Reformed history. So that was my gateway, or that was my entry in. Maybe around the time I could almost all fully affirm the confession, I was sent to be a youth, similar to you. I was sent to be a youth pastor at a smaller church nearby where I was living. I was only there for a couple of years. My convictions with confessional theology was way too strong, and especially ecclesiology was way too strong. I couldn't continue to serve in that church, and in God's providence, opportunity arose in the church I pastored before where I am now, and that's when I began serving as a lead pastor. So yeah, brief overview. That's kind of the trajectory.
Yeah, that's really cool. So Wilson, how long have you been serving as a lead pastor where you're at now?
Lead pastor where I'm at now, as of this month, is 2 years. This is a church plant here
Okay.
in so for just kind of give a geographical idea. Way north Texas, Wichita Falls is a city. It's like 100,000, so it's fairly small for a city, at least for Texas. 15 minutes from the Oklahoma border. So like yeah, I've slowly worked myself up top, and going every move. It seems like it closer and closer to the north of Texas. But so yeah, that's where I've been now for 2 years. Before that, I was 4 years, a little over 4 years at another church. It was an SBC church. Before that, and then yeah, and then before that was just 2 years at that other one as just a youth pastor.
Cool. And yeah, I'm always curious about church planting. I was a part of a church plant team for a short season as well, and have always had a passion for church planting. But would love to hear maybe that what was it that led you to the conviction that Texas needs another church instead of being a part of like a revitalization or a relaunch of an existing church?
Oh man, that's a good question because I have experience with both, or I've experienced with feeling like there needs to be a church plant. I think at one point I would have told you, no, I know there is, and my wife remembers the conversation. Uh, one time we were having a discussion about church plants, and I mentioned to her I wouldn't dare touch a church plant. That's not me. I don't have the mentality of that. I don't want to deal with the stress. So never had in mind a church plant. And in fact, so before was revitalization of a church. So where I was before SBC, 2017, I went to the SBC convention in Phoenix. So it's a different place every year, different city. All 40,000. I don't know how many churches there are. The SBC get together. Their messengers get together, and there was a discussion on uh, their discussion on church planning. The North American Mission Board is like the organization in the SBC that oversees church plants in SBC, and they gave some crazy statistic. I'm gonna forget it, and I might butcher it, but it's something crazy like 5,000 churches close their doors every year in the United States, or maybe in North America. So that was my great, and that was in the midst of my drastic growth and urge to be in ministry. It was there that I had a great desire explode for to be in ministry. That was my desire to go into revitalization of an SBC church at that time, committed to Reformed, or I would even say confessional leanings. So fast forward a couple of years, I get into the lead pastor of a SBC church, small church, and I had the desire uh, for revitalization. I thought that's and I still do, and I'll get to that in a moment. I just thought that's what we need to do. We don't need to plant more churches. There's these churches around, and they a lot of them are they believe fully in the gospel. They affirm the orthodox teachings of Christianity. They just need guidance and they need patience. So that was my idea. I went in, small church. Long story short, 4 years, immensely difficult in a variety of ways. Trials in the church. Uh, there was trials in the church, health issues with my wife, financial difficulties, and perfect storm of those. It ended our time there, though the Lord brought growth.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, so to your question of why church planting, well, this church came about before I began here. This plant, I was brought in at the very beginning. There was already a group meeting here, and I was called in by our association to lead this confessional church, to be a 1689 or Second London church. Um, but looking back and having more discussions with guys in revitalization is certainly merited. There needs to be focus with it. It needs to be treated more like a mission than just you getting into any type of church. As far as I went into it alone. It needs
Mm-hmm.
to be more of a almost treated like a church plant where ideally you would have support with you. So it's not just you going by yourself. You have ideally another elder, pastor,
Mm-hmm.
or deacon, or at least families that can go, if not all, and treat it that way because you are getting into territories where you're challenging people's presuppositions. And I'm not talking about, and I know this is where many folks are going to fall on, uh, trying to convert them to a reform soteriology. I'm not even speaking of that. I'm talking about just taking basic uh, taking basic ecclesiology seriously. What I mean is a good foundational understanding of baptism, and then regenerate church membership, and then uh, tied with that is expositional preaching, a right view of the sacraments, or especially Lord's Supper. It was those things that really we had pushback on when I was where I was serving, and having further support of people who affirm those things and agree with those things is very substantial and important. So yeah, so that's my view, and we have a lot of churches in Texas, and I think a lot of them just need revitalization. Um,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I think both are needed. I think there needs to be some church plants because not all churches are merited or worthwhile to keep alive. think there are a lot are, but some aren't. And then on top of that, Texas is exploding with population, people moving in, so there's more need of further strong confessional churches.
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I mean, my wife and I went down recently to Nashville with a couple friends just to kind of see just to kind of enjoy Tennessee a little bit. And man, I came back going, when can we move to the South? Like, this seems like the promised land, because I don't know how much you or your followers know about Canada, but it's if you look at perhaps the trajectory that the American church has been on for the last decade or 20 years or more, Canada is much, much further down that slide from a theological, moral um, standpoint, much, much more liberal, much more socialist, much more government control in all sorts of areas. I mean, we're currently dealing with a government that um, wants to try to remove the charitable status of churches so that they can access the funds that are represented by our physical building, so we can start to have to pay more taxes on. I mean, so this is where we're coming from, right? So the Canadian church faces challenges that the American church doesn't, and or not yet anyway. Praise the Lord. But I came back from Tennessee going, man, we could sell our house for a ton of money and we can move to Tennessee and buy a little farm and, live the dream. And I almost felt conviction from the Lord of like, well, if the Lord has placed me in a place that needs the gospel, why would I run away from that opportunity? And so this conversation has been one that I've been sort of wrestling in my own mind with and I liked your distinction of the revitalization versus church planting. And I agree with you in that a revitalization, in my experience, really only happens if people want it to happen. If you come in and go, here's what I think, I have the golden ticket, we're going to
Yeah.
see some change and transformation in this church, I'm going to help you guys with your theology, that usually doesn't go well, right?
No.
There's obviously humility and patience and all of those things, and just a love for, in most cases, what you see in small dying churches is a remnant of true believers that just love Jesus and want to see a church happen there, but maybe they don't know how to do it, or maybe they're still pretty anchored in how they've always done things. And but I agree with you. Like, if you've got a couple people that have a similar theological conviction, it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. A big help in working through this stuff. Some of the material I was immensely blessed, like a lot of guys with 9 Marks Ministry by
Yeah.
led by Mark Dever. I read a lot of those things and it was an immense help. And then our church, the church I pastored, we had book studies on these things, so I was kind of laying foundations, and it was immense help. It's still to this
Mhm.
day, speaking with the pastor who's now there, and some members who are still there that I have connections with, the Lord has brought growth. And some of the things that kept in mind, a couple of nuggets that really stayed with me with the process of revitalization. Mark Dever made the comment. There are actually two things he made a comment on. One, he says you need to love the people not where they will be, but where they are now. And so
Mhm.
when I got in, I was about they need to be here, and they'll be more lovable here when they get this. And it was so hard. I had to. I was convicted by that. I had to readjust
Mhm.
my thought process of how does Christ love me now, not where I will be, and that's how I need to love them. And then secondly, his motto, and I think he's shared this or encouragement he's given to other pastors was preach, pray, love, and stay. And so just preach
Mhm.
faithfully the word, pray for the church, pray for the members, love them, and then stay. Which was a goal. I think Brian Croft, who's at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, he leads a revitalization cohort, or did. His comments have been you start to see your fruit in 5 years. So the first 5 years you're at a church, you don't really see your fruit. You're seeing the other pastors, so the former pastors' fruit. And I think that had held a lot of merit.
Mhm.
I saw for the 4 years I was there, I saw a lot of the fruit of the previous pastors. Near the time at my end, that wasn't so much a case, but and then now there's growth. So patience is certainly needed, and as you said, there has to be humility. Otherwise, there, whether, even if you have someone come along with you, they'll just buck and fight it. If you act
Yeah.
with arrogance, uh, acting like they need to change all of a sudden and how they've been doing things for years or decades, they're going to balk at that, and you're just going to have a lot of work on your hand, more work than necessary.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I find, because I found myself in this position where you begin to, like we've talked already about some of the pastors, theologians, some of the authors that have helped kind of bring us along in our understanding of not just salvation, but also the church and ministry in general and covenant theology and all of these rich historic things. It can feel kind of like you're doing a bit of a deconstruction of your own kind of pietistic understanding of I where I've been at recently, to be honest, is like it's easy for me, and I think it's easy for us as evangelicals to think, yeah, for sure, my justification, my salvation is by grace alone through faith alone, and then my sanctification or my growth in Christ likeness is by my hard work, right? If I just yeah, I come to Christ by faith. And then if I just read my Bible enough and I abstain from enough things and I do enough of the right stuff, then I will produce fruit in my life. And just coming, and I think what the Reformation heritage has helped me come to is to see that, the Christian life is about all of Christ for all of life. It's not just Christ for my salvation, it's Christ for my sanctification and my growth. And what that produces in me is this immense compassion and willingness to show grace to others just like Christ shows to me. It's a growth, it's a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, of
But
course it is. Yeah,
yeah.
that's good.
Maybe just I don't want to take too much of your time, but just a couple questions I'm interested in. So in particularly in a young church plant scenario, um, are you what are you finding is maybe the biggest question or struggle or challenge that people face, especially coming from maybe other evangelical backgrounds to a church like yours that's engaging in maybe the regulative principle of worship? Like, totally loved your video on that, your liturgy, like the whole liturgy formed around the gospel. Man, that was transformational for me. Um, but what do you find are maybe some of the questions that you have to walk people through when they come through the door and go, oh, this seems a little different than what we're used to?
So one shallow, quick, like two immediate things come to mind. One shallow answer, uh, and then one deeper matter. So shallow wise, one thing new to many who come to our church, and for background, only one family of our church plant has experience in a confessional church, and it was a confessional Presbyterian background. Outside of that, everyone comes from non-reformed backgrounds, and most churches, or most of them would agree, even the churches that they were part of were not frankly healthy in some way, shape, or form. So very, very charismatic, or independent fundamental Baptists, or very big, more non-denom, seeker-sensitive church, what have you. So all those shapes and sizes and flavors, and so when folks come and experience our liturgy, and then I mentioned in that video, we will read the creeds. A number of them will mention the Catholic Church. That throws them off. And so there's an explanation of what Catholic means, the universality of it, and especially at the time when they're written. This is something we can affirm
Mhm.
as the Catholicos. And so again, very shallow. But when I read the creed, I will explain that in the very beginning, just so they're not shocked and awed, thinking, "Whoa, what is this? I thought this was a evangelical church." So that brings a lot of questions. So almost always, especially if we know we have visitors, I'll explain what that means. So very more on the shallow side, but that's something that usually we probably had more questions than anything. Maybe secondarily to that is the weekly observance of the Lord's Supper. Our people love it. We never had an issue with it. They no pun intended, they eat it up. Uh, but they see how it's a glorious means of grace, and they look forward to it, as do I. So
Hmm.
shallow, deep thing, and this was a trial. Uh, Learning this through trial is the the significance of ecclesiology, the significance and the patience of qualified men for elders, what that looks like for the church to affirm it, what they should look for, the significance and maybe further standards we have of in the more confessional reform world on pastors, and back in more in the SBC world and maybe non-denom, and I'm going to paint with a broad brush that might offend some, but I don't think the standard has been immensely high overall, um, and and so it should be a fairly guarded standard. Um, do the men not only? I mean, so kind of a question that was brought up is man, according to Titus, what Paul explains to Titus, man must hold firm to sound doctrine. What is that? How do you define that? And we would
Hmm.
affirm, that's just Presbyterians would affirm, or those who hold to confessions, Anglican, Reformed Baptists, or Congregational Baptists, Presbyterians, that is summarized in our confessions. So we must know that well. So leading the congregation, kind of summarizing what I mean all this, leading the congregation and what that looks like and being patient with that, longing for that, praying for the elders to come and be risen up in the church, but making sure those, and of course character wise too, making sure those are affirmed, and all that deals with ecclesiology. So like right now, again through trial, which man, the Lord really blessed us bringing this on because we're learning. I'm learning. We are walking through our confession. Chapter 26 of the London Baptist is on the church. So we're touching on that. We're walking through what it means, ecclesiology from baptism to membership, selection of elders, the keys of the kingdom the congregation wields, what that looks like. We're tying in our bylaws, and I really encourage elders to have a
Hmm.
good understanding of their bylaws. Most don't. They need to. They are to be a guide and authority of the church, and I think we use them as breaks. We don't really think, or maybe even better analogy, I think we use our bylaws and constitutions kind of like airbags. Uh, they're there in a big accident, but we really don't care otherwise. And I think that gets us into bad situations, and
Hmm.
that pertains to me too. So we're tying in our teaching the bylaws with our confession, and then on top of that, one of the great congregational reformed men of the 16th century was John Cotton, who influenced John Owen and Thomas Goodwin. In fact, he converted them or convicted them of Congregationalism over from Presbyterianism. In his
Hmm.
book, The Keys of the Kingdom, right here, what you can get on free, by the way, online, The Keys of the Kingdom of Heaven. He just kind of walks through the keys of the kingdom and how the congregation, the local church, wields it, and elders and congregation. He kind of walks through the distinctions. So I've even tied that in. We went through that in summary of what he exposits on like Matthew 16, Matthew 18. So those three things have we brought together in our teaching on Sunday mornings, kind of like Sunday school time. Me and another brother. That has been huge, and I would say I wish I did that in the beginning.
Hmm.
Walk through that in the very beginning because that gives a good foundation for those new to a healthy church, a church that takes seriously ecclesiology. So I want to really be sure those who are listening to this take this beyond just those in confessional reformed churches. This matters whether they're Anglican or non-denominational or what have you. Just taking ecclesiology very seriously, and of course, it made me affirm all the more congregationalism. But yeah, so that's something we've learned. Our congregation has had answers about or questions about, and they're now being better answered.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. I kind of think of like I grew up as a kid. I used to do a lot of bowling when I was a kid, and when you go to the bowling alley, sometimes as a child, they'll inflate those bags and put them in the gutters,
Yeah.
and so you can't get a gutter, you can't throw the ball in the gutter. And I sort of think of like some of those documents, those supporting subordinate documents that you're talking about, constitution of your church, historic creeds and confessions can act like those bumpers, right? That sort of keep us on. Of course, they're not inspired, they're written by people, but they're a healthy, good summary of what the Bible teaches about important doctrines. And you probably find this yourself. I'm currently taking a group of guys through the Second London Confession, which is all very new. The fellowship of churches that we're a part of, while it's Baptist, they would not call themselves confessional. And so it's like discovering a new gem, like something that's been hidden away in the closet for a lot of years, and we're bringing it out and dusting it off. And I'm finding in particular the young men, and maybe you're finding this too, young men are just hungry for some kind of historical anchoring, some sort of transcendence that is bigger and beyond just kind of the big box church experiences that they've had in a lot of cases. And so this has been a really sweet thing. And what I often find is people will say, well, we shouldn't really spend so much time on doctrine because doctrine divides. To which I say, and in some cases it should. Some cases our doctrine should divide, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That was
Yeah.
going to be my response. I mean, Paul speaks of those who are holding to false doctrine have nothing to do with them. So it literally is to divide. Of course, there needs to be wisdom in the division. Uh, and one thing I found with confessional, when the more I adhere to to confession, to the Second London, is in comparison with brothers in other traditions, whether that's more of a historic Reformed Anglican, Orthodox Anglican, Reformed Presbyterian brothers, uh, there's more unity despite our distinctions. And I think confessionalism, ironically to those who may not be confessional, I think it protects our unity, and I think it protects our foundations of what we believe, and then our distinctions as well, and affirming those. So, uh, yeah, it seems like the more I've gone into the more confessional world, the more unity I found for the most part.
Absolutely. I think one of the books that's been so helpful for me as I've gone through it slow is What is a Reformed Baptist by Tom Hicks. And it's been immensely helpful. And in there, he says this. I'm probably going to butcher it, but he says something like, a Reformed Baptist is a species of the genus Reformed, not a species of the genus Baptist. And so, as a Reformed Baptist, I find myself having much greater affinity and agreement with, yeah, my Reformed Presbyterians, you know, um, Dutch Reform, those sorts of things, than I do with many evangelical Baptists around me. And so it's sort of made me feel a little bit like a square peg in a round hole. But I totally understand what you're saying. And even just looking at the history of the Westminster and the Savoy Declaration and the Second London on how they were so similar, and they did that on purpose, right, to show their unity around those core Reformed doctrines. I found that to be super helpful.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, absolutely, absolutely.
No, that's really cool. Wilson, I appreciate just kind of chatting with you. I guess maybe the last question sort of has two parts. You can do with it what you want. But if you're talking to someone out there right now who is an individual sitting in a church and maybe they're on the same journey that you and I have been on, kind of discovering, developing convictions that would be more of a reformed nature, and they're in a church that maybe isn't that, what would you recommend that they do? And then secondly, if there's a fellow brother, a pastor here who's like, yeah, I'm kind of on this journey too, and my current church does not align with some of those convictions, what would you recommend to both of those brothers? Or yeah.
For the brother who's not a pastor, depending on the type of church, and let's say he's in a typical evangelical church, non-denom, I would tell him to humbly uh, be patient, be very aware of the what they call the cage stage the cage stage time or stage. It pertains to men of and people of various backgrounds, whether Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, going to those traditions or vice versa, whatever trajectory you go. Boy, when people leave a tradition, they really get angry and hot of the tradition they just left. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, social media is just littered with that. But so if you're coming to those convictions in the church you're at, and look, you're hearing the Bible preached. Um, there's overall clearly, maybe your church has some issues, and you very well may need to look to see if there's more of uh, a confessional church in your area. If there is, we'll make plans to sure to lead that direction, but be patient and be very kind and humble in how you react with others. I wish I was more humble and kind in how interacted with others when I was coming to these convictions. I said some stupid things I shouldn't have said. So
Mm.
be very mindful of your humility, and what is at the center of our faith. Don't be burning bridges or antagonizing brethren who don't have your convictions or they're at a different level of maturity. So that'll be my greatest encouragement is just be patient as you make this journey. For the pastor, um, depending on the situation, I've heard some horror stories of men coming to these convictions and they try to warp the whole church to them, and not so much like Baptists becoming confessional Baptists and a typical Baptist leading folks to confessional church. It's not so much that I'm have in mind, but maybe brothers who are in more drastic level of bringing the church to a point where, like, let's say their current doctrinal standards, they would really be flipping on as they're coming to reform convictions. And so that might be the non-denominational to confessional, might be Baptist to Reformed Presbyterian or what have you. And again, I know firsthand of experiences of that going really poorly and pastors not handling that where they should have just stepped away. I guess is what I'm getting at is
Mm.
no, if you're going against the church's total doctrinal standards, you need to gracefully leave. Uh, Unless there's a clear cohort, the majority who may desire your convictions, that might be a different situation. Um, but also so similar with a guy who's just a member of a church. Be patient, uh, be patient, be very humble in the process, and be mindful of your fellow brothers and sisters, and bringing in conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict.
Yeah, that I think that's a really good word, and I think that um, because I've been thinking about this too myself, is if you're in a church that has a degree of health and the gospel is being preached, and yeah, maybe there's areas that you might not agree with ecclesiologically or in other areas of perhaps secondary or tertiary doctrines. Um, I think what's helped me is to think, if you're in a church that's 40, 50, 60 years old and you've got brothers or sisters who have been a foundational part of that covenant community for decades, for me to come in and make drastic changes would in a sense be for them a losing of their church, right? And I think that's a valid question to ask ourselves, is like, is that even fair to my brothers and sisters to make a wholesale change to something that they don't even recognize as their own anymore? And I think if that's the point, it's almost better for you to maybe go off and either pastor somewhere else or plant a church somewhere else, because a lot of damage can be done to a relatively healthy church by someone who kind of wants to superimpose their own convictions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So kind of some examples just to leave folks with what I'm thinking of. Uh, one conviction I had was regularly partaking of the Lord's Supper, kind of mentioned earlier. A high view of that ordinance or sacrament, if we can call it that. And in the church I was serving, they maybe observed it twice a year. I moved it when I got into once a month. I thought that was a good middle to ground, and I think by and large that was good. That was okay. I did have some pushback eventually, but it was only by a couple of members. Uh, but let's say someone that's a conviction someone's coming to, instead of implementing it, I'm thinking of a pastor implementing it right there. All right, next week or next month we're going to week observing the Lord's Supper, which is what we do, what I would long for. I I would go through a good series, either a sermon series or use their Sunday school time or whatever setup of smaller studies they have, and work very carefully in the biblical exegetical meaning of the Lord's Supper, its significance, and then historical background. Okay, well, what did the early Baptists view of it, or what did the church by and large view of it, and kind of tie it all together to present it to the church and be patient so they can come along with you. You're not dragging them to that conviction. And you can take a number of different doctrines on secondary, tertiary doctrines on this matter and do the same thing where you just slowly work through it. Regenerate church membership, uh, maybe some eschatological differences or what have you. Where on the flip side, I guess the big things I was having in mind was if you come to Presbyterian convictions and you're a pastor, you, and you're in a Baptist church, you go. I'm at a Baptist church. If I become Presbyterian, I'm going. I'm not gonna, hey church, we're gonna work through this and flip to this conviction. Uh, that that's that I think that would be very unwise at best, if
Mhm.
not even sinful, causing division in a church where they already have their foundational structure. Uh, Coming to a conviction of difference in Lord's Supper observance is not contradicting Baptist theology, nor the confession of that church, probably, or statement of faith of that church. But Presbyterianism or what have you, that's a bigger difference. So yeah, that was the difference I had in mind when it comes to serious matters and less serious.
Sure. Yeah. I was even thinking of, like, I think Mark Dever has mentioned this in a couple of his books, that if you come to the firm conviction that a healthy church is one that practices church discipline, and you just go off into your church and start hauling people in front of the congregation in this public sense,
Right.
that's not going to be helpful or effective, right? It's again that slow, patient teaching and instruction. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good
Yeah.
example.
Well, Wilson, I won't take any more of your time. Last question, super serious one. Where do you get your vests from?
I
Because they're
well,
awesome.
yeah. Thank you, brother. I have more comments on this than maybe anything else as of now. In the last few months, I can't tell people how many comments I get, emails, what have you. And it's funny because it's a very obvious and cheap place. It's Amazon. So I
Okay.
if you just Google or Amazon search vest and maybe you put in tweed vest, it's probably going to be one of the first things that pops up. And I want to do it right now, just real quick. Let's see. If I go Amazon and I just type in tweed vest, I bet it's going to be the first thing that pops up. This, and they are. It's one of them. There's some other options. So $25. I feel like I got them cheaper before, but $25 you can get them for. And I've bought like 4 or 5 of them. I'll probably buy some more again. But
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
So
Amazon.
so in Canada, those will be $300.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure they will be. Yeah, unfortunately.
no,
And,
that's really cool.
and your tobacco is pretty expensive, from what I understand too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I'm looking at the prices that you guys pay, and I'm like, wow, it's ours is like 3 times as much.
yeah, I bet it is. And I think Australia, it's 10 times or 8 times what we pay. Like $100 a tin or something, $80 a tin, something crazy like that. But
Yeah,
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 yeah.
that's
So
pretty wild.
it puts me in perspective of my complaining of when our price goes up a couple of bucks. I'm like, oh, what are they doing? And then other guys are paying like you $30, $40 a tin or $80 a tin for other guys around the world.
Yeah,
But anyway, yeah,
totally. Well, Wilson, thanks so much for taking the time out to chat. It's been really helpful and fruitful and enjoyable, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime or meet up in person.
that'd be good, brother. Yeah, I appreciate
Yeah.
it.